The wagon wheels kicked up dust as Martha Hendricks clutched her old carpet bag tighter against her chest. She could see the town of Copper Ridge in the distance, small and dusty under the afternoon sun. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst right through her worn dress. 3 weeks ago, she'd seen the advertisement in the newspaper. A ranch needed a cook. Good pay, room and board included. She'd stared at those words for hours, memorizing every letter. Back home there was nothing left for her. The farm was gone, sold to pay debts. Her stepmother had made it clear there was no room for Martha anymore. The wagon driver dropped her off at the edge of town. She stood there for a long moment, watching him disappear down the road. Now she was truly alone. The Double R Ranch was supposed to be just outside town. She'd have to walk there. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to move forward. Every step felt heavy, not just because of the bag she carried, but because of the weight of doubt pressing down on her shoulders. What if they took one look at her and sent her away? What if the ranch owner laughed? She'd heard the comments her whole life. Too big, too much, taking up too much space. Her stepmother's voice echoed in her head with every insult she'd ever heard. The ranch appeared after a 20-minute walk. It was bigger than she'd expected. Fences stretched out in all directions. Cattle grazed in the distance. The main house was sturdy and well-built, with a porch that wrapped around the front. Smaller buildings dotted the property. Everything looked organized and cared for. Martha stopped at the gate, her courage failing. Maybe she should turn back. Find work in town instead. Anything would be better than the rejection she was sure was coming. But then she remembered she had exactly $3 to her name. She couldn't afford pride. She walked up to the main house and knocked on the door. Her hand was shaking. The seconds stretched out like hours. Then the door opened and Martha had to tilt her head back to see the man's face. He was tall. Really tall. Probably the tallest man she'd ever seen. Broad shoulders, sun-weathered skin, and eyes that were a surprising light blue. He wore work clothes, dusty from a day's labor. There was gray in his dark hair, though he didn't look old. Maybe late 30s. He looked at her with curiosity, but not unkindness. Martha's prepared speech died in her throat. All her words jumbled together. She felt her face burning with shame. Here was the strong, capable man, and here she was, exactly what she'd always been told she was. Wrong. Out of place. Too much. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "I'm too fat, sir, but I can cook. I'm here about the job." The man blinked. He looked confused, like he'd heard words in the wrong order. He studied her face for a moment, then looked down at the advertisement she was clutching in her trembling hand. "You're here for the cook position?" His voice was deep but not harsh. There was a gentleness to it that surprised her. Martha nodded, unable to meet his eyes. She stared at her shoes instead, waiting for the rejection, waiting for him to tell her to leave, waiting for the door to close in her face. "Can you really cook?" he asked. "I mean, can you cook well? Not just beans and bacon, but real food?" She nodded again. Cooking was the one thing she'd always been good at. The one thing people praised her for. Her mother had taught her before she died. It was the only skill that had ever made Martha feel like she had value. "Yes, sir. I can cook anything. Breads, roast pies, stews. I know how to preserve food, how to make supplies stretch. I can manage a kitchen and plan meals for however many men you have working here." The tall man was quiet for a moment. Then he did something Martha didn't expect. He smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small one, but it reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. "Then I don't see what the problem is. I'm James Rutherford. I own this ranch, and I've been eating burned beans for 3 months since my last cook quit. If you can do half of what you say, you're hired." Martha's head snapped up. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Sir? You're hired," he repeated. "When can you start?" "I can start right now. Tonight, if you need me to." The words rushed out. She couldn't believe this was happening. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't turned her away. He'd barely even reacted to her appearance. James nodded. "Tomorrow morning is fine. Let me show you where you'll be staying." He stepped out onto the porch and led her across the yard. Martha followed, still in shock. He walked her to a small cabin set back from the main house. It wasn't fancy, but it looked solid and clean. There was a porch with a rocking chair. Windows with actual glass. A door that hung straight on its hinges. James opened the door and gestured inside. The cabin was simple. One main room with a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and some shelves. A separate door led to what looked like a washing room. It was more than Martha had hoped for, more than she felt she deserved. "It's not much," James said, misreading her silence, "but it's clean and warm. The roof doesn't leak. There's firewood stacked out back. You'll take your meals in the main house with me and the hands, but you can use the stove if you want privacy sometimes." Martha set her bag down slowly. Her throat felt tight. "It's perfect. Thank you, sir. Just James is fine. We're not formal around here." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Breakfast is at 5. The hands start work at dawn, so they need to eat early. I'll show you the kitchen and the main house tomorrow morning. There's supplies, though I'll warn you they're running low. We'll need to make a trip to town for more within the week." Martha nodded, still barely able to process that this was real, that she had a job, a place to stay, that this man had hired her without a second thought about anything except whether she could cook. James tipped his hat to her. An actual gesture of respect. "Welcome to the Double R Ranch, Miss Hendricks. I think you'll do just fine here." He left, and Martha stood alone in her new home. She walked slowly to the bed and sat down. The mattress was thin but clean. The blanket was rough but warm. She looked around at the 4 walls that were now hers, at the table and chairs, at the little stove. Then, for the first time in months, Martha let herself cry. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of hope, of a possibility she'd stopped believing in. Maybe, just maybe, things were going to be different here. Maybe in this dusty frontier town, far from everyone who'd ever made her feel small, she could finally find a place where she belonged. She wiped her eyes and unpacked her few belongings. Tomorrow would come early. She had a kitchen to run and men to feed, and she was going to show James Rutherford that hiring her was the best decision he'd ever made. Martha woke up before dawn, just like she had every morning of her life. The cabin was dark and cold, but she didn't mind. She lit the lamp and dressed quickly, pulling on her plainest work dress and tying her hair back in a tight bun. Today was her first day. She couldn't mess this up. The walk to the main house was short. The sky was just starting to lighten, turning from black to deep blue. She could hear the horses stirring in the barn. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. The ranch was waking up, and so was she. The kitchen was bigger than she'd expected. A large cast-iron stove dominated one wall. Shelves lined another, though they were disappointingly bare. James hadn't been joking about supplies running low. She found flour, some salt, a bit of sugar, eggs, and thankfully, plenty of bacon and beans. There was a root cellar out back with potatoes and onions. Not much to work with, but she'd manage with less. Martha got to work. She started the fire in the stove and let it heat while she mixed biscuit dough. Her hands moved automatically, the way they always did when she cooked. This was where she felt confident. This was where she knew exactly what to do. She made the biscuits large and fluffy, the way her mother had taught her. While they baked, she fried bacon until it was crispy, made gravy from the drippings, and scrambled eggs with butter and a pinch of herbs she found growing wild near the door. By the time the men started arriving, the kitchen smelled like heaven. Martha heard their boots on the porch, their voices low and rough with sleep. She kept her eyes down as they filed into the dining room. She could feel them looking at her. Could feel their curiosity. She placed the platters of food on the table and stepped back, waiting. The silence stretched out. Then someone picked up a biscuit, bit into it. She heard a small sound of surprise. Then everyone was reaching for food, and the room filled with the sounds of eating. Real eating, not just the mechanical filling of empty stomachs, but genuine enjoyment. James was the last to sit down. He took a bite of biscuit, then gravy, then eggs. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. He looked up at her and gave a small nod. Not a big gesture, but it felt like approval. Like she'd passed some kind of test. "This is incredible," one of the ranch hands said through a mouthful of food. He was young, maybe 20, with red hair and freckles. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Martha's face heated up. She wasn't used to compliments. "My mother taught me, sir." "Well, your mother was a genius," another hand chimed in. This one was older, with a gray beard. "I haven't had biscuits this good since I left Tennessee." The praise continued through breakfast. Martha didn't know what to do with it. She cleaned up while they ate, keeping busy, keeping her head down. When they finished and filed out to start their work, she was left alone with the dirty dishes and a strange feeling in her chest. Something light, something that might have been pride. The days fell into a rhythm. Martha woke early, cooked 3 meals a day, and managed the kitchen like a general managing an army. She made lists of what supplies they needed. She planned meals a week in advance. She never wasted anything. Bacon grease became gravy. Leftover roast became hash. Stale bread became pudding, and her cooking kept getting better. With the first supply run to town, James let her order whatever she needed. She bought spices, real coffee, dried fruits, and better cuts of meat. She started baking pies. Apple, cherry, and peach when she could get them. The men acted like she'd given them gold. James noticed everything. She could feel him watching sometimes when she worked. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but like he was trying to figure something out. He started taking his coffee in the kitchen in the mornings, sitting at the small table while she prepared breakfast. They didn't talk much. She wasn't good at talking, but the silence felt comfortable. 3 weeks into her job, one of the hands made a comment. His name was Dale, and he'd been standoffish from the start. He'd finished his dinner, a roast so tender it fell apart on the fork with potatoes and carrots and fresh bread. He pushed back from the table and looked at Martha. "You know, it's a shame," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "If you looked different, you could probably find yourself a husband with cooking like this." The room went silent. Martha felt like she'd been slapped. She'd been so caught up in her work, so focused on proving her worth that she'd almost forgotten, almost let herself believe that here maybe things were different. But they weren't, they never were. She couldn't look up, couldn't move. She just stood there, frozen, feeling every eye in the room on her, feeling the shame wash over her like it always did. Hot and heavy and suffocating, James stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. When he spoke, his voice was cold, colder than Martha had ever heard it. "Get out." Dale blinked. "What? Pack your things and get out." "You're fired." "Boss, I was just joking around. I didn't mean nothing by it." James took a step toward him. He was so much taller than Dale, so much broader. There was something dangerous in his stance. "You disrespected a woman who's done nothing but work hard and cook you the best meals you've ever had. You made her feel small for no reason, except that you thought it would be funny. I don't keep men like that on my ranch. You have 1 hour to be gone." Dale looked around the room, but no one met his eyes. The other hands just stared at their plates. He stood up, his face red with anger and embarrassment, and stormed out. They heard him slamming things in the bunkhouse. James turned to Martha. His expression softened. "Are you all right?" She couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight. She just nodded, though it was a lie. "I meant what I said. Respect isn't optional here. Not for you, not for anyone." He looked around at the other men. "That goes for all of you. Martha is part of this ranch now. She's one of us, and we look after our own. Is that understood?" A chorus of "Yes, boss" filled the room. The men went back to eating, but the mood had shifted. Several of them looked at Martha with something like apology in their eyes. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Martha sat alone in her cabin. She thought about what had happened. About Dale's cruel words, yes, but more about James's response. No one had ever stood up for her like that. No one had ever made her feel like she mattered, like she deserved to be treated with dignity. She didn't know what to do with that feeling. It was too big, too unfamiliar. So she did what she always did when emotions overwhelmed her. She planned tomorrow's menu. She made lists. She focused on the work. But something had changed. Something small but important. For the first time in her life, Martha started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was in a place where she could be safe, where she could be valued, where the size of her body didn't determine the size of her worth. It was a small seed of hope. But sometimes that's all you need to start growing. Winter came to Copper Ridge like an unwelcome visitor, arriving early and settling in hard. The first snow fell in October, and by November the world was white and frozen. Martha had never experienced a winter this harsh. Back east, winters were cold, but this was different. This was bone-deep cold that made your teeth hurt and your fingers go numb even inside gloves. But she didn't complain. She couldn't afford to. She had a job, a home, and people who depended on her. So she bundled up in every layer she owned and kept working. The men needed hot food more than ever now. Warm stews, thick soups, fresh bread to fight off the cold. She made sure they had it. The root cellar was her biggest challenge. It was set into the ground behind the main house, down a short flight of stone steps. She had to visit it several times a day to get vegetables and preserved goods. Usually it wasn't a problem. But when the snow got deep, those steps became treacherous. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The snow had fallen all night, heavy and wet. Martha needed potatoes and carrots for the lunch stew. She wrapped herself in her warmest shawl, pulled on her boots, and headed out. The cold hit her like a wall. Her breath came out in white clouds. The wind stung her cheeks. She made it to the cellar doors and pulled them open. The steps were covered in snow and ice. She should have waited. Should have asked one of the men to clear them first. But she didn't want to be a burden. Didn't want to ask for help with something she should be able to do herself. She took the first step carefully. Then the second. The third step is where her foot slipped. She felt herself falling, tried to catch herself, but there was nothing to grab. She tumbled down the remaining steps and hit the frozen ground hard. Pain exploded in her head. The world spun. She tried to get up, but her legs wouldn't work right. Everything felt wrong. Too cold, too heavy. She managed to crawl a few feet toward the house, but then her strength gave out. The snow around her looked soft. Maybe she could just rest for a minute. Just close her eyes for a moment. James found her 20 minutes later. He'd been in the barn and noticed she hadn't come back inside. Something told him to check. When he saw the open cellar doors and her tracks in the snow, his heart stopped. He ran, calling her name. She was lying in the snow, her lips blue, her skin pale as death. He dropped to his knees beside her and pressed his fingers to her neck. There was a pulse, thank God, but it was weak. She was barely conscious, her eyes unfocused. "Martha, Martha, can you hear me?" He got no response. He didn't waste time. He scooped her up in his arms and carried her toward the house. She was burning with fever despite the cold. She must have been sick before she even went outside. Probably had been fighting it for days without telling anyone. He kicked open the door to the main house and carried her straight to the guest room. He'd never used this room. It was supposed to be for visitors who never came. But it had a bed and a fireplace, and that's what mattered now. He laid her on the bed and immediately started a fire. Then he called for one of the hands to ride for the doctor. The snow was bad, but this couldn't wait. He peeled off her wet clothes with his eyes mostly closed, trying to preserve her dignity even in this emergency. He wrapped her in every blanket he could find. The fever raged. She was burning up, mumbling words he couldn't understand. He brought cold water and cloths, pressing them to her forehead and wrists the way his mother had done for him when he was sick as a boy. He made weak broth and tried to get her to drink, supporting her head, coaxing a few spoonfuls past her lips. The doctor arrived that evening. He examined her and confirmed what James already suspected. Severe fever, possibly pneumonia, made worse by exposure to the cold. She needed rest, warmth, and constant care. The next few days would tell if she'd pull through. "I'll stay with her," James said. "Tell me what to do." The doctor left instructions and medicine. James settled into the chair beside the bed. He didn't leave except to get more water or broth. The ranch hands took over the cooking, making simple meals. They kept the house running. They understood this was important. For 3 days, Martha burned with fever. She called out in her sleep, fragmented words that painted a picture of her past. "I'm sorry," she said over and over. "I'm sorry for taking up space. I'm sorry I'm not enough. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." It broke something in James to hear it, to understand how deep her pain went, how long she'd been carrying this weight. He found himself talking to her even though he didn't know if she could hear. "You're not taking up space, Martha. You belong here. You're not too much. You're exactly right." He kept his voice low and steady. "You don't have to apologize for existing. Not anymore. Not here." On the third night, the fever broke. Martha's eyes opened, clear for the first time in days. She looked around the unfamiliar room, confused. Then she saw James slumped in the chair beside her bed, his head resting on the edge of the mattress. He was asleep, his hand still holding a damp cloth. She must have made a sound because his eyes opened immediately. He sat up, wincing at the stiffness in his back. "You're awake." His voice was rough with relief. "Thank God, how do you feel?" "Tired," she whispered. Her throat was raw. "What happened?" He told her. About finding her in the snow, about the fever, about the 3 days she'd been unconscious. As he talked, Martha's eyes filled with tears, not from pain but from the realization of what he'd done. "You stayed with me?" Her voice broke. "You took care of me yourself?" "Of course I did." He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, like there had never been any other option. "But I'm just the cook. You could have had someone else do it." You didn't have to about Martha. He cut her off gently. You're not just anything. You're a person who was sick and needed help. That's all that matters. She stared at him. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever made her feel like her worth wasn't tied to what she could do for them. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry I'm such a burden. I'm sorry. Stop. James's voice was firm but not harsh. Stop apologizing. You got sick. That's not your fault. You're not a burden. You're a human being who deserves care and kindness. When are you going to believe that? Martha didn't have an answer. She'd spent her whole life being told the opposite. She'd built her entire sense of self around the belief that she was too much, that she took up too much space, that she had to earn the right to exist by being useful. The idea that someone might care for her just because she was a person, not because of what she could do, was too foreign to process. James must have seen the confusion on her face because his expression softened. You don't have to understand it right now. Just rest, get better. Let someone take care of you for once. Over the next week, Martha recovered slowly. James insisted she stay in the guest room where it was warmer. He brought her meals. He sat with her in the evenings, reading aloud from books or just talking about the ranch. He told her about his life, about building this place from nothing, about the loneliness that came with it. And slowly, carefully, Martha began to open up too. She told him about her mother who had loved her, about her stepmother who hadn't, about the years of feeling invisible and wrong, about coming to Copper Ridge as a last desperate hope. I'm glad you came here, James said one evening. This place is better with you in it. Martha didn't know what to say to that, so she just held on to those words, tucking them away in a place deep in her chest where she could take them out and look at them when the old voices got too loud. When she finally moved back to her cabin, she wasn't the same person who had fallen in the snow. Something fundamental had shifted. The armor she'd built around her heart had a crack in it now, a small crack, but big enough for a tiny bit of light to get through. Big enough to let her start hoping that maybe, just maybe, she deserved kindness after all. Spring came slowly to Copper Ridge like it was being careful not to scare away the winter. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass underneath. The days grew longer. The air lost its knife-edge cold. And something shifted between Martha and James, subtle but undeniable. It started with the evening meals. The ranch hands would finish eating and head to the bunkhouse or into town for their weekly night off. Martha would clean up and James would stay at the table with his coffee. At first he'd just sit there quietly while she worked. Then he started helping her dry dishes. Then they started talking, small talk at first. The weather. The cattle. Plans for spring planting. But gradually their conversations deepened. James would linger longer. Martha would work slower. They found themselves looking forward to these quiet hours when it was just the two of them, and the evening settling around the ranch. One night in early April, James told her about building the ranch, how he'd come west with nothing but the money he'd saved working on other people's land, how he'd lived in a tent for 2 years while he built the main house board by board, how he'd worked until his hands bled and his back screamed, driven by a dream of having something of his own. I thought once I built it, I'd feel complete, he said, staring into his coffee cup. I thought having land and cattle and a successful ranch would be enough. But it's not. It's just empty. I built this whole place and I have no one to share it with. Martha's hands stilled in the dishwater. She'd never heard him talk like this. Never heard the loneliness in his voice that matched the loneliness she'd carried her whole life. You have the ranch hands, she offered quietly. He shook his head. They're good men, but they're employees. They'll move on eventually, find their own places or go back to families they left behind. This ranch needs more than just workers. It needs, I don't know, life, laughter, someone who makes it feel like home instead of just a place where I sleep. Martha wanted to say that he'd made it feel like home for her, that for the first time in her life she felt like she belonged somewhere, but the words stuck in her throat. She wasn't brave enough yet. A few nights later, James asked her about her family. Really asked, not just polite questions. Martha had spent her whole life avoiding this topic, but something about the quiet kitchen and the way he looked at her made her want to tell the truth. She told him about her mother. How warm and loving she'd been. How she'd taught Martha to cook and told her she was beautiful and special. How she died when Martha was 12, leaving her alone with a father who didn't know what to do with a daughter. He remarried a year later, Martha said softly. My stepmother was different. She was beautiful, elegant, everything a lady should be. And I was everything she wasn't. She never hit me or starved me. Nothing like that. But the things she said, what did she say? James's voice was gentle, but there was an edge to it. Like he already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. Martha took a breath. She'd never said these things out loud before. That I was an embarrassment. That no man would ever want me. That I ate too much, took up too much space, cost too much money. That I should be grateful she allowed me to stay in her house even though I was worthless. The words came faster now, like a dam breaking. She'd compare me to other girls in town, point out how pretty they were, how delicate. She'd sigh and say what a burden I was. How she'd done her Christian duty by taking me in, but that didn't mean she had to pretend I was something I wasn't. James's hands had curled into fists on the table. His jaw was tight. That woman should be ashamed of herself. You were a child. Her child by marriage, if not by blood. How could she? He stopped, taking a breath to calm himself. I'm sorry. I shouldn't get angry. But Martha, you know none of that was true, right? Martha shrugged, looking down at her hands. They were red from washing dishes, the nails short and practical. Working hands. She wasn't wrong about some things. I'm not delicate or elegant. I'm not the kind of woman men write poems about. Good thing I never learned to write poems then, James said. His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. Martha, look at me. She forced herself to meet his gaze. You are kind. You're hardworking. You're talented. You make this whole ranch run better. You make everyone around you happier. Those things matter more than being delicate or elegant or whatever nonsense your stepmother valued. He paused. You matter. Not for what you do, but because of who you are. Martha felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them away. You don't have to say things like that. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true. After that night, something changed. James started leaving small gifts. He'd never make a big deal of it. Just leave things where she'd find them. A bunch of wildflowers on the kitchen table, a new apron in soft blue fabric, a book of recipes from San Francisco with beautiful illustrations, once a pair of sturdy gloves lined with soft wool. Martha didn't know what to make of it. She'd never received gifts before, at least not gifts that weren't obligations or duties. These felt different, personal. Like James had thought about what she might like and tried to make her happy. She started doing little things for him too. She'd noticed his favorite foods and made them more often. She'd pack him extra lunch on days when he'd be out on the range for long hours. She mended his shirts when she noticed tears, even though that wasn't part of her job. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering if he was warm enough, if he was eating enough, if he was happy. One evening in late April, they sat on the porch of the main house watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. The air smelled like new grass and possibility. Can I tell you something? James asked. And you promise not to laugh? Martha nodded, curious. I used to think I knew what I wanted. Land, cattle, success. A respectable ranch that people would talk about. But since you came here, I've realized I was wrong. Those things are fine, but they're not what makes life worth living. He turned to look at her. It's this. Sitting here with someone who understands, having conversations that matter, looking forward to coming back to the house because someone's here who makes it feel like home. That's what I was missing. Martha's heart was beating so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. James, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. You've changed this place. Changed me. And I'm grateful you took a chance on that advertisement. That you came all the way out here. That you stayed. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower. Martha felt something growing in her chest. Something warm and terrifying. She was starting to care about this man. Really care about him. Not just as her employer or even as a friend, but as something more. It scared her more than anything ever had. Because caring about someone meant they could hurt you. Meant you could lose them. Meant you were vulnerable in ways you couldn't control. She'd spent her whole life building walls to protect herself from exactly this feeling. But as she sat there next to James, watching the sunset paint the world in gold, Martha realized something. Maybe walls kept out pain, but they also kept out everything else. Joy, connection, love. Maybe it was time to be brave. Maybe it was time to let someone in. She didn't say any of this out loud. She wasn't ready yet, but she let herself scoot a tiny bit closer to James on the bench. just close enough that their shoulders almost touched. And when he smiled at her, soft and genuine and full of warmth, she let herself smile back. It was a small moment, the kind that doesn't seem important when it happens, but sometimes the small moments are the ones that change everything. And as the stars started appearing in the darkening sky, Martha felt the walls around her heart crack just a little bit wider, letting in a little more light, a little more hope, a little more possibility that maybe, just maybe, she deserved all the good things James saw in her, and maybe if she was very brave, she could learn to see them in herself too. Eleanor Ashford arrived in Copper Ridge on a Tuesday morning in May, stepping off the stagecoach like she was descending from a throne. Everything about her screamed refinement and wealth. Her traveling dress was deep burgundy silk with delicate lace trim. Her hat was perfectly positioned atop carefully arranged dark curls. Even the way she moved seemed calculated to draw attention. Martha saw her from the kitchen window. She was preparing lunch, rolling out dough for biscuits when the stagecoach rattled past toward town. The woman inside was beautiful in a way that made Martha's chest tighten. Delicate features, slim figure, graceful posture. Everything Martha had been told her whole life she should be but wasn't. She didn't think much of it until James came back from town that afternoon with news. Eleanor was the sister of the banker in Copper Ridge. She was a widow from Philadelphia, here to visit her brother for an extended stay. And apparently, she'd already heard about the successful rancher outside town and was very interested in making his acquaintance. "She sounds lovely," Martha said, keeping her voice neutral as she set dinner on the table. Something cold had settled in her stomach, but she ignored it. James just shrugged. "I suppose. Her brother seemed to think we should meet. Some dinner party this weekend." He didn't sound particularly interested, which should have made Martha feel better. It didn't. The dinner party was at the banker's fine house in town. James was expected to attend. As his cook, Martha wasn't invited, which made sense. She was staff, not a guest. She told herself it was fine. She had no business feeling disappointed, but that Saturday evening, as she watched James leave in his best suit, looking handsome and proper, she felt something twist in her chest. He was going to spend the evening with Eleanor Ashford, the beautiful widow from Philadelphia. And Martha would be here, alone, in her little cabin, exactly where someone like her belonged. James started getting invitations after that. Dinner with the Ashfords, a church social, a town picnic. Eleanor seemed to be everywhere, and she always made sure James was invited too. At first he went reluctantly, but gradually Martha noticed he came home later. He talked about Eleanor sometimes at their evening meals, casual comments about conversations they'd had or things she'd said. Then Eleanor came to the ranch. She arrived in a fine carriage, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Martha made in a year. She wanted a tour, she said. Wanted to see this impressive ranch everyone was talking about. James, ever the gentleman, obliged. Martha watched from the kitchen window as they walked the property. Eleanor held James's arm delicately, looking up at him as he pointed out various features. She laughed at something he said, the sound carrying across the yard like music. She looked perfect next to him, like she belonged there in a way Martha knew she never would. When they came inside for refreshments, Martha had coffee and fresh cake ready. She kept her eyes down as she served them, trying to be invisible. But Eleanor noticed her. Of course she did. "You must be the cook everyone raves about," Eleanor said, her voice sweet as honey. "James has told me so much about your wonderful meals." "Thank you, ma'am," Martha murmured, setting down the plates. "It must be so satisfying," Eleanor continued, "having such a useful skill." "A woman who can cook well will always have employment, won't she? Even if other opportunities aren't available to her." The words were perfectly polite on the surface, but Martha heard the meaning underneath. "A woman like you will always have work as a servant. That's all that's available to someone like you." James frowned slightly, like he'd caught the undertone too. But Eleanor had already moved on, asking him about his cattle and his plans for expansion. Martha excused herself and went back to the kitchen, her face burning. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor became a regular presence. She'd ride out to the ranch in her carriage, always perfectly dressed, always with some excuse. She wanted to see the new foal. She had some preserves her cook made that she thought James might enjoy. She wondered if he might escort her to the spring dance in town, and the more Eleanor came around, the more Martha withdrew. She started taking her meals in her cabin instead of with James. She spoke less during the day, keeping conversations purely professional. She couldn't compete with someone like Eleanor, so why torture herself by trying? James noticed. Is something wrong? He asked one evening when she'd refused to stay for coffee after dinner. You've been different lately. Nothing's wrong, Martha lied. Just tired. It's been a busy week. Martha. He started to say something else, but Eleanor's carriage appeared in the yard at that exact moment. She'd come to invite James to her brother's house for dinner. Again. I should let you go, Martha said quickly. Miss Ashford is waiting. She retreated to her cabin before James could respond. Through her window, she watched him help Eleanor into the carriage, watched them drive away together, and she made a decision. She couldn't stay here and watch James fall in love with Eleanor. Couldn't watch him choose someone appropriate, someone who fit into his world in ways Martha never would. It would hurt too much. Better to leave now before her heart broke completely, before she made a fool of herself by hoping for something that was never going to happen. That night, Martha started packing. She didn't have much. The same old carpet bag she'd arrived with could hold everything she owned. She'd saved most of her wages. She had enough to get to the next town, maybe find work at a hotel or boarding house. She wouldn't give notice. Couldn't face that conversation. She'd just leave a note and slip away before dawn. She wrote the note 3 times before she got it right. Kept it simple and professional. Thanked James for the opportunity. Said she'd found a position elsewhere that was a better fit. Wished him well. Didn't mention Eleanor. Didn't mention that leaving was breaking her heart. Some things were better left unsaid. Martha folded the note and left it on the kitchen table. She'd slip out in the morning before anyone woke. Start walking toward town and catch the stagecoach when it came through. By the time James found the note, she'd be gone. She lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling. She'd been happy here. For the first time in her life, she'd felt like she belonged somewhere. Like she mattered. But that had been foolish. People like her didn't get happy endings. They didn't get the handsome rancher. They got to watch from the kitchen while someone else got those things. She thought about James, about his kindness, about the way he'd taken care of her when she was sick, about their evening conversations and the gifts he'd left her, about how for a few brief months she'd let herself imagine that maybe those things meant something. But of course they didn't. James was just a good man who treated everyone with respect. The gifts were just thoughtfulness from an employer. The conversations were just 2 lonely people passing time. She'd built a fantasy in her head and Eleanor's arrival had shattered it. Better to face reality now. Better to leave on her own terms than to be dismissed when James asked Eleanor to marry him. 'Cause that's what would happen eventually. Anyone could see it. Eleanor was perfect for him. Beautiful, refined, from the right kind of family. She'd make an excellent ranch wife, hosting dinner parties and managing the household with grace. Martha tried not to cry. She told herself she was being practical, smart, protecting herself. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of James's smile. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners, the way he'd said her name gentle and warm, the way she'd never hear him say it again. Tomorrow she'd leave. Tomorrow she'd go back to being invisible and alone. Tomorrow she'd start forgetting what it felt like to belong somewhere, to be cared for, to matter to someone. But tonight, just for tonight, she let herself remember. Let herself feel the loss of what could have been if only she'd been different. If only she'd been enough. Her packed bag sat by the door ready for morning. A silent testament to the truth Martha had known all along but had briefly let herself forget. People like her didn't get fairy tale endings. They just got to survive, and sometimes that had to be enough. James couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't put his finger on what. He'd gotten home late from the Ashfords' dinner party, another tedious evening of polite conversation, and Eleanor's increasingly obvious hints about their future together. All evening he'd wanted to be somewhere else. Specifically, he'd wanted to be in his kitchen, talking to Martha over coffee while she cleaned up from dinner. But Martha had been avoiding him for weeks. Ever since Eleanor arrived, actually. He'd tried to talk to her about it, but she kept insisting nothing was wrong. Just busy, just tired, just distant. It was driving him crazy. Around midnight, he got up and walked through the quiet house. He didn't know why his feet carried him to the kitchen, but they did. And that's when he saw it. A folded piece of paper on the table, pale in the moonlight coming through the window. His hand shook as he picked it up and lit a lamp to read it. The words were brief and professional. Martha was leaving. Had found another position. Thanked him for the opportunity. That was it. No real explanation. No goodbye. James crushed the paper in his fist. Like hell she was leaving. Not without talking to him. Not without telling him the real reason. He stormed out of the house across the yard to her cabin. Light showed under her door. She was awake. He knocked hard enough to rattle the frame. Martha opened the door, silence. Then soft footsteps. The door opened a crack. Martha stood there in her nightgown with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying. James. I'm sorry, I wasn't going to leave until morning. I was going to... Why? He cut her off. Why are you leaving? I told you in the note. I found another position. That's a lie. Where? Doing what? He pushed the door open wider, and that's when he saw the packed bag by her bed. Something in his chest twisted painfully. She really was going to leave. Was going to disappear without giving him a chance to fix whatever was wrong. That's none of your concern, Martha said quietly, but there was something in her voice. Something broken. None of my concern? You're just going to vanish in the middle of the night and you think I don't have the right to ask why? James stepped inside uninvited. Talk to me, please. Tell me what's really going on. You should go. Martha wrapped her shawl tighter like she was trying to hold herself together. It's late. We can discuss this in the morning. No, we'll discuss it now. Because I have a feeling if I leave, you'll be gone by morning. He looked at her closely. Is it something I did? Did I offend you somehow? Did one of the hands say something? No, you've been nothing but kind. Then why are you running away? I'm not running away. Martha's voice rose and then she caught herself. Took a breath. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter but thick with emotion. I'm just leaving, moving on. People do it all the time. Not you. You're happy here. I know you are. So something changed. Tell me what. Martha turned away from him. Her shoulders were shaking. Please just let me go. I can't do that. James moved closer. Not without understanding. Did something happen? Is someone threatening you? No one's threatening me. I can't stay here anymore. I can't watch. She stopped abruptly like she'd said too much. Watch what? Nothing. Forget I said anything. Martha, please. James put a hand on her shoulder, gently turning her to face him. That's when he saw the tears streaming down her face. What can't you watch? And then it all came pouring out. The words tumbled from Martha's mouth like a dam breaking, raw and desperate and full of pain. I can't watch you fall in love with her. I can't watch you choose Eleanor and build a life with her and be happy with her. I know that's what's going to happen. I know that's what should happen. She's perfect for you. She's beautiful and refined and comes from the right kind of family. She'll be an excellent wife and give you beautiful children and host perfect dinner parties. I know all of that. But I can't stay here and watch it happen because... She stopped, covering her face with her hands. James gently pulled her hands away. Because why? His voice was soft. Because I love you. The words burst out of Martha like they'd been locked inside too long. I know I have no right to. I know I'm just your cook and you're my employer and I'm not the kind of woman you could ever want. But I can't help it. I fell in love with you. With your kindness and your laugh and the way you see good in people. With our evening conversations and the way you stood up for me when Dale was cruel. With every small gesture and every moment you made me feel like I mattered. She was crying in earnest now, the words still flowing. I know I'm not enough. I know I'm too fat and not pretty and not refined. I know Eleanor is everything I'm not. And I'm not asking you to choose me. I would never ask that. I can't stay and watch you be happy with someone else. It hurts too much. So please just let me go. Let me leave with whatever dignity I have left. The silence that followed was deafening. Martha couldn't look at him. Couldn't bear to see pity or discomfort on his face. She'd ruined everything. But at least she'd told the truth. At least she wouldn't have to wonder what if. Then James did something she never expected. He started laughing. Not cruel laughter, but the kind of laughter that comes from relief and disbelief and joy all mixed together. Martha's head snapped up. What's so funny? You think I'm in love with Eleanor? James was grinning now, his eyes bright. Martha, I can't stand Eleanor. She's been making my life miserable for weeks, but you spent so much time with her. The dinners and the visits and because I was trying to be polite. Because her brother is the banker and I need to maintain good relations with the town. Because she kept showing up and I couldn't figure out how to turn her away without being rude. He took Martha's hands in his. Every second I spent with Eleanor, I was wishing I was with you instead. Martha stared at him. What? I fell in love with you months ago, James said, his voice gentle but steady. Probably the first week you were here, if I'm honest. When you made those biscuits and looked so surprised when everyone praised them. When you worked yourself half to death to make sure everyone was fed and happy. When you were sick and kept apologizing for being a burden even though you were the one who needed care. But I'm not like Eleanor. I'm not beautiful or refined or... You're more beautiful than Eleanor could ever be, James interrupted firmly. Do you know what I see when I look at you? I see someone with the kindest heart I've ever known. Someone who works hard and never complains. Someone who makes this ranch feel like home. Someone who makes me laugh and makes me think and makes me want to be better. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. Eleanor is pretty, I suppose. But she's cold. She looks down on people who work for a living. She treats servers like they're invisible. She talks about people behind their backs and judges everyone who doesn't meet her standards. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized she was everything I didn't want in a partner. And what do you want? Martha's voice was barely a whisper. You, James said simply. I want you. I want to come home to your smile. I want to have evening conversations that matter. I want someone who understands what it means to work for what you have. I want someone with compassion and strength and the courage to start over when life knocks them down. He moved closer. I want someone who makes me feel less alone. And that's you, Martha. It's always been you. But you never said anything. I didn't think you'd want me. I'm just a rancher. I work with my hands and smell like horses most days. I don't have fancy manners or eloquent words. I thought someone as special as you deserved better than what I could offer. Martha let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You thought I deserved better? James, you're the best man I've ever known. You're kind and strong and you see people for who they really are. You made me feel valuable for the first time in my life. How could I possibly want anyone better than you? James smiled, that soft smile that made his eyes crinkle. So we're both idiots who couldn't see what was right in front of us. I suppose so. Martha felt like she was floating. Like this couldn't possibly be real. Are you sure? You're sure you want me? Even though I'm not... If you finish that sentence with anything negative about yourself, I'm going to have to prove you wrong. James warned gently. And it might take a very long time. Prove me wrong how? By spending every day showing you how incredible you are. By making sure you never doubt your worth again. By loving you the way you deserve to be loved. He paused. If you'll let me. If you'll stay, Martha looked at him. At this man who saw her, really saw her and loved what he found. Who'd been patient with her walls and kind through her fears. Who was offering her everything she'd been too afraid to dream of. I'll stay, she whispered. I love you, James, I'll stay. He pulled her into his arms and Martha felt something inside her finally settle. Finally find peace. This was home. Not the cabin or the ranch, but this. Being held by someone who loved her. Being safe and valued and enough. Will you marry me? James asked against her hair. Make this official? Let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm the luckiest man alive. Martha pulled back to look at him. You really want to marry me? More than I've ever wanted anything. Say yes, Martha. Please say yes. She thought about all the years she'd spent believing she wasn't worthy of love.